Okay, working on some wiring today. Going to be installing this fused relay box. I got this on Amazon. It was like 35 bucks, not too bad. Pretty much what this allows you to do is to power 6 objects that draw high current. So that's like a fuel pump, electric fan, light bar, something like that. A lot of times when you wire in one of these relays for one of those accessories, they're not fused, which is what's cool about this box. Each one of these relays has fused outlets. So when the relay triggers, it feeds power through this fuse and then to one of these big gauge wires, and one of these big gauge wires run to each one of those accessories. So when you're running like maybe 5 feet of wire from this outlet to say your electric fan, if you didn't have a fuse here, if that wire was to ever rub through, that could spark, catch on fire. That's no good. So this box is a nice, clean, tidy way of having relayed and fused power all in one spot. Okay, I'll quickly run through how one of those relays in the boxes work. I got the relay shown here in the middle. Pretty much there's 4 wires that go to each one of those relays. They all share ground that's shown here. They also all share heavy 12 volt in. So that's a thick gauge wire, that big cluster of red wires. They all share power in. That's usually right from the battery. A nice thick gauge wire. Then they each have 2 separate wires for each one of those relays. One is the 12 volt trigger wire in, and then one is the outlet wire to whatever accessory you want to power. 12 volt trigger wire, that's usually from a switch, or your ECU could have an output that pretty much sends a signal of 12 volts into the relay. Once that relay sees 12 volts from this trigger wire, it's basically a mechanical switch inside the relay. It flips on, and then it'll feed 12 volts from the battery right through to your accessory. The cool thing about that box is each one of these relays is fused. That's what's shown here. And that fuse protects you if you ever were to have a rub through in the wire. So because that box is nice and compact, this whole setup is really close and in one spot. And then anywhere from the fuse to your accessory, that's usually a longer run of wire, maybe a couple feet. If that ever rubbed through, this wire would go to ground. That's like your chassis, as soon as that wire touches something else. And instead of sparking up like crazy, you'll see full current through this wire, which is enough to trip your fuse. Say it's like a 30 amp. That fuse will pop, and then this accessory will no longer get power. So that'll prevent fires or sparks or anything weird like that. And then for wiring the accessory, the inlet power comes from your relay. And then the accessory usually needs ground too, so you can just wire that right to ground. The cool thing about that box is it has this whole setup. There's 6 of them, all nice and compact and tight in that one spot. So it's easy to wire, and you get 6 things you can power. Okay, the first step to getting that thing put in the car, I think, is to find a good spot to mount it. I'm thinking this little cubby up to the firewall here on the passenger side will be a good spot. A couple thoughts for where I wanted to mount this thing. I wanted it somewhere that's definitely going to stay dry, so under the hood should be all set. Also wanted it somewhere that's tucked up and out of the way. 1, so that you can work on the car without a bunch of wiring getting in your way. And 2, I didn't want it next to anything hot or moving or something that can rip out those wires. So it looks like this cubby's going to be a good spot. It's going to sit down there and something just like that. Looking at how I actually physically want to mount this, it's got these 2 eyelets that I can put a bolt through. I don't really want to drill into this section of the firewall because I don't know what's behind that. I know there could be like heater core or coolant stuff possibly behind there, HVAC stuff, so I don't want to drill in there. But I do have these 2 tabs that are threaded down in there. So I think I'm going to utilize those, and I'll make some kind of bracket to hold it up against that wall. I used to have my old coolant tank there, so there was a bracket there at one point. So I'm going to do a similar thing to hold this there. Okay, I got this bracket whipped up that I think is going to work nicely. Pretty much this is all just 1 inch by 1/8 inch flat stock. What I did is I measured the distance between those 2 tabs in the car. And I made this outside kind of bracket out of the 1 inch flat stock, kept it all nice and square. Then I welded these feet on the bottom, tacked them in place, and I got this tipped back a little bit. It's not perfectly square that way because I want it to sit flat against that firewall. So this goes on here like this. Got these 2 holes at the top. Those mount the box. And then I also got this other spot tabbed, welded on here because I want to have a central spot to hook up big power to this box. So pretty much going to have a cable that goes from the battery right to this junction point with this wire. Hold that off nice and isolated and steady so that it's not going to get touched by anything and short out. And then once that's all fixed on there, I can go ahead and start wiring up these other wires. One other thing I just remembered is when I bolt stuff onto brackets or anywhere that I am making a part, I found that I have to take things apart that I put together pretty frequently, which is probably bad, but it's just how it is. So anytime that I got a situation like this where there's a through bolt with a nut in the back, if I can weld these nuts to the bracket so that I only have to take this bolt out and not have to drop the nut or whatever, that's just an easier way to do things. So I'm going to go and put some welds on these nuts so it's don't have to hold those nuts. Okay, I got the fuse block all mounted up on the bracket, and I also got this power wire mounted on a lug that I'll be able to tie in with big power from the car later. This piece right here is called a fuse block. I had a couple of these laying around from some trailer wiring I did years ago. It's a cool piece. You can pretty much mount it somewhere that is conductive, and it's an insulated piece, so both these posts are going to be insulated from whatever it's bolted to, so it won't be grounded out. So I have this mounted on the bracket, and then this lug is going to have power fed to it from the car. And this lug is like an insulated spot where you can do that. So now that this is all mounted up, I'm going to go ahead and get it in the car. Okay, got the fuse block mounted solid on the car. I'm pretty happy with that. It's pretty firm on the bracket. Down below, you can see where that power is nice and tucked up underneath. Now I just got to bring power to this lug here to feed the fuse box. These BMWs are rear battery cars, as an E46. So pretty much this lug right here in the engine bay usually has a cover on it. Right there is the big 12-volt wire that is coming from the back of the car. Where the battery is. That's run all the way up from the battery to this local spot here. I'm thinking underneath this cover there's some kind of mount or bolt or something that transfers power from that wire to this block. So I'm hoping I can tap in here and then make some kind of wire that runs right to my terminal block. So I'm going to check that out. Okay, perfect. So that's a nice bolted connection where that 12 volts comes in. So I'm going to go ahead and make a wire that will run from this spot to my 12 volt inlet on my fuse block. One more thing to note before I start doing any wiring with that 12 volt terminal down there, I got the battery disconnected so I can go ahead and monkey around in there and there won't be anything shorting out. This is the wire I like to use for making these big power cables. I got this at Tractor Supply. I think it was like $100, which kind of sucks, but it's 25 feet and it's 2 gauge. So it's nice and thick, ton of copper there. I don't know what the current rating is on this, but it's starter cable, so you can run a starter right off of this. So I'm going to go ahead and cut a piece to length, then knock some terminals onto it. Got my length of wire here cut. I'm going to go ahead and strip the ends and then get my terminals put on. These are the terminals I like to use. You can go to either Advanced or O'Reilly's or somewhere, and these are backed by the battery section. Fully copper, and they're 2 gauge, so the wire fits on them good, and they got nice big holes, so you can get them bolted up. All right, for mounting these terminals on here, I like to give this wire a nice twist, get all those strands pretty well aligned and together, pop them on, and then what I found best to keep these things crimped on is I hit them good with a hammer to crimp them on, and then I also solder them for a little extra kind of hold on to. So got it here on the vise. 2 whacks, and that's on there pretty good. Do that to both sides, and then I solder them up. Okay, for soldering these, I found that using the MAP gas torch works pretty well. and then just some regular rosin core solder, pretty much like you'd be doing a plumbing fitting in a house. Okay, I've done a bunch just like that, and I've never had one come off, so that's how I'm going to keep doing them. Okay, for heat shrinking these ends, my favorite thing that I found to work well is this marine grade heat shrink tubing from Harbor Freight. What's cool about this stuff is it's actually got glue in there, and that glue kind of melts out and really keeps the heat shrink on there and doesn't allow any water to get in there. So that's what I like to use for these ends. See how that glue kind of leaks out nice? I mean, that heat shrink's not coming off. That's perfect. The last thing I like to do for these big gauge wires is put some of this wrap on here. This is a silicone coated fiberglass heat wrap. So it's good for avoiding heat. The silicone is pretty good in the hot temperatures, as is the fiberglass. And also the fiberglass gives some abrasion resistance. I really worry with these big wires. If this was to ever like be rubbing against the body of the car or anything metal, like it wouldn't take much to kind of chafe through this outside. I mean, you could probably almost do it with your fingernail. And with this much current flowing through one of these wires, it's not really fused anywhere, so that would definitely be sparking and maybe causing a fire. So I really like this this wrap on the big gauge wire. So when I make one of these wires, or when I kind of build anything, I always try to think like, you know, the plan is to put it in the car and have it be in there forever. And when a car is going down the road, there's so many vibrations that happen all the time. Like just even this just rubbing against it, like what if you, how many times is that going to vibrate when you're driving? If that happens 100,000 times, like it wouldn't take much to chafe through that. Whereas this wrap, I don't think you're ever rubbing through that fiberglass. So slips on. This piece is dropped too long, but I'll trim it and then go ahead and get it bent up and put into shape in the car. One more thing with this heat wrap, comes in all kinds of colors. You get it on Amazon, it just comes in a roll. I bought a bunch of black, and I have all my AN fuel lines wrapped in this stuff because I stay up at night worrying about that braided line rubbing through on the car somewhere, pissing fuel. But I feel good with this coating. It seems pretty durable. So, all right, got that line bent in shape pretty much how I think it's going to go. And I also put a little bit of heat shrink on each end. Tape this side because I ran out of heat shrink, but keep that wrap in place, and it's a nice stout line there. All right, I'm pretty happy with how that power wire fits. Comes in up from the battery, bolts into this terminal block, runs down, goes to my terminal block, and then all those red wires feed the fuse block power. Okay, that's pretty much it for this fuse box install. I'm happy with how that came out. One thing I'm probably going to do is go ahead and pull it out one more time and solder on spade connectors to all those wires, because it's pretty difficult to solder down in there without getting close to other wiring. Okay, now I'm going to try to figure out which relay is fed by which fuse, and then probably which wire goes to which relay as well. So I got my multimeter set to continuity mode. When you touch the wires, completes the circuit, it beeps. Start by trying to figure out which side of the fuse is the inlet power and which side is outlet, which will go to one of the relays. So because they all share those common positive wires on 12 volts, all these fuses should be connected. Which they are, right? Because all these pins now are currently getting 12 volts. I got two fuses pulled because two of those, when those two are pulled, one side will have 12 volts, one side won't, because the fuse completes that circuit. So, for example, I'm on this where the white fuse was. If I go to the left pin and the right pin, no continuity, right? Because it's missing the fuse, so there's no way to complete that circuit. However, the two inlet where the power goes into those fuses, those should still be connected because it'll go through these other fuses in the wiring that all goes to the same 12 volt source. So if I go right side on both relays or fuses, no beep. If I go left side, it beeps. And that's beeping because it's all sharing the same wire of 12 volt, like that whole 12 volt circuit's connected. So now I know the right side of the fuse is the outlet power which feeds a relay. So now I'm going to pick this top spot where that white relay was, and I'm going to go around to each one of the 6 relays and try to figure out only one of these pins in one of the 6 relays should be receiving power from the outlet of this fuse. So nothing, 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 nothing. And there it is, that beeps. So this is telling me that this fuse right here, which was white, is feeding power to this relay. So this fuse and this relay are connected. And that makes sense because I'm assuming 1, 2, 3 relays probably feed 1, 2, 3 fuses feed the top 3 relays, and then 1, 2, 3 fuses feed these 3 relays. So we got number 2 on the top, number 2 on the top. That makes sense. Taking it one step further, now I want to determine which one of these 6 relays feeds power out to this white heavy gauge wire. So same kind of concept. I got one end of the multimeter connected to the white wire, and now I'm going to go around check each one of the poles on these relays to see which one of these pins feeds power out. I'm going to guess because the second pin of the white relay, this second relay is probably the one that feeds power out. So it's not where the power came in, obviously. One of these is going to be ground, one's trigger, and then one should be the outlet wire. So nothing, 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 nothing. Ooh, did I miss it? Huh, does that not go there? Okay, so that was actually wrong then. Looks like this first relay sends power to the white wire, and that's showing right here. So when the relay flips, it'll take its 12 volts, send it through this pin into my fat white wire. Just to triple check that, I'll check all these pins. And nothing else beeps, so that tells me right here that this first relay is connected to the white wiring. Alright, now this fuse box is in, I can go ahead and start wiring up some of my accessories. Last thing I wanted to do before I ended this video was to just demonstrate how the fuses work with the relay. So I'm only going to have 3 of these relays in it for now. I think I only have 3 accessories I want to wire, but for now I just have the one in to demonstrate. So working with the green fuse here in the middle, second relay, and green outlet wires. I got some jumpers hooked up. So right now the fuse box has power coming in from this fat 12 red wire, and then it also has common ground. I got jumpered over to ground here. We got one green alligator clip here that goes to the fat green wire down at the fuse box. And then I got my yellow jumper here hooked up to the small green wire. The small green wire is a trigger wire. The fat green is the outlet of that relay. So back to that earlier demonstration. When I put 12 volts to my trigger wire, the small green, you're going to hear that relay click. So get it in view here. Right here, this is 12 volts on the car. So when I hit this, you should hear the relay click. Not sure if you can hear it, but it is clicking. Every time I hit this, you hear it click. That's basically the mechanical switch inside switching on. So every time this wire is connected, this green wire is going to have power. To demonstrate the fuse popping, I'm going to put power through the trigger wire. That'll activate the relay. And then if this green wire, the outlet, was to short out somewhere, that fuse is going to pop. Okay, so now I got a test light rigged in here to that green fuse to show that it's going to go out when we simulate a shorting on our grounding. Test light right now is fed by power from the fuse. When the fuse trips, there'll no longer be power there, so the test light should go out. Yellow wire trips my fuse. This is going to simulate this green wire getting grounded when I touch here. Touched it, we saw the spark, and the test light went out. So that fuse popped and saved us from having any sparking or fires. Okay, I'm going to show how I like to put these connectors on. I always solder everything because I feel like the crimps rip off too easy. So first thing, obviously, got to put your heat shrink tubing on first. This is that marine grade stuff with the glue. So get that slid down as far as you can so that the heat from the solder doesn't shrink it ahead of time. I'll go ahead and crimp this on. I really like this Milwaukee soldering iron. This thing's been great. Just the battery, and it heats up really quick. Does a good job soldering. Only thing you got to be careful with these connectors is you can't let solder run down onto the face or in the female end of these, because that'll completely mess it up and you can't get them in. So just kind of keep it up. So if there was any solder was to run down, it'll run down towards the wire and not towards the connector. Alright, so that one's good and soldered. Go ahead and get the heat shrink down. And there's one to go, one down.